All right, everybody. Stupid versus spread. Mike and I are doing a back-to-back doublehead recording, so it'll be another shorter episode, but the NFL ones aren't too long. Fun week, NFL Week 5. Pretty hefty on the storylines here. We'll start with probably the biggest of them all. Um, the Panthers fire Coach Matt Rule. He is out after I believe 3 years. Michael, is that correct? Three and some change.
Yes, was hired in 2019.
So Matt Rule out. Kind of saw it coming. I think he was the running favorite to be fired. He obviously came from Baylor before that. Um, I don't know that it was shocking. Was it shocking to you?
No, I think the only shocking part is how early in the season this happened. Most NFL teams don't do that. I saw Florio and some other people hypothesizing about this on Sunday after their game. That I think his particular situation is he's attractive for some of these college jobs that are open. And if he gets hired for one of those jobs, that decreases his buyout.
That's
Um,
fair.
So that's part of the financial calculus. I think the plain calculus here is that the Panthers have just looked lifeless this entire year, and they're not good.
I
Um,
mean, his overall record was 11-27. You can't after 3 and some change years. You can't say that that's great. And of course, that statistic got very popular. Rule was 1 in 27 when allowing 17 or more points in a game. Um, and I think that I don't know if that obviously played into a factor, but that did catch fire as like a on Twitter thing, like trending. Oh, Matt Rule, another loss that he let up 17 points and couldn't win a game.
yeah. So I mean, yeah, I think it's the right move. I don't have a ton of confidence in Matt Rule as an NFL head coach. I think things started to really sour when they fired Joe Brady. Um, I like. Should the Panthers be better? Yeah, probably. Do they go anywhere until they fix their quarterback situation? No. So they have a decent roster around Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold, but it's nothing, you know, that spectacular. They still need a bona fide number one wide receiver. They have a lot of money locked up in McCaffrey. The offensive line's decent. Defensive line's pretty good. Secondary is very good. They always draft well, so the pieces are there to have a quick turnaround for whoever's going to come in next. I think obviously Tepper's going to go in the direction of an NFL established, more traditional hire, and then they're going to be very aggressive this summer, um, or this spring in trying to either work their way up in the draft or get somebody who comes available on the market, even swinging as big a bat at somebody like a Lamar if his contract talks break down. So they'll be an interesting team to watch and how they try to turn this around. But I think it was about time.
Yeah. So Steve Wilkes takes over for the Panthers. For those of us who don't remember Steve Wilkes, he was the Arizona Cardinals head coach for 1 year in 2018, where he went 3-13 and was promptly fired. Unfortunately for him, so he has another shot here as the interim coach of Carolina. We'll see if he stands out. I think Baker is probably not the guy going forward, not the starter going forward. As you're talking about long-term investment in players, I think it's reasonable to assume that the Panthers might try to acquire a quarterback in the offseason. I think they're kind of going to ride out this year, see how Wilkes does. I don't see him being the head coach. Carolina, I don't know what their schedule. I'm looking it up right now. Um, I
I,
don't know if their schedule is difficult or not, but if you really have to impress as an interim coach to um, get the nomination the following year. And I don't know that.
no, I think they go with not a retread, but somebody who has had like Leslie Frazier's name jumps to
Mm,
mind in Buffalo with what he's done with their defense. Um, D'Amico Ryans is going to be a strong candidate who's in charge of San Francisco's defense right now, who's playing lights out. So those two, I think, are going to be popular um, names that are going to be circulated. I would have said Aaron Glenn is definitely in that name, the DC and Detroit, but they have sucked on defense this year. Um,
So I will say, at this point in the season, the Panthers have arguably gotten through the worst part of their schedule. They have to play the Bucks twice, and they'll play the Bengals. But it's and the Ravens. I think those will be the tough matchups. But they have the Falcons twice. They have the Broncos, the Seahawks, the Lions, the Steelers, and the Saints. I think if you can change how things are done there and you can get some momentum, and I know some people say momentum's not real, but if you can get some internal momentum, maybe some confidence in these players, maybe some confidence in Baker, who doesn't look like himself as of late, I think you might be able to see some upward mobility. I don't know, given his past history as a 1 year coach, that they inherently stick with him, but I think he can build up his resume as an interim at least. But yeah, the Panthers season more or less. I don't want to say over, but more or less acknowledged to be over at 1-3.
yeah,
Um, with
one and
a
four.
difficult enough schedule and a difficult enough division that they don't come out on top.
Yeah, I think the last 2 weeks sealed the deal, and just how non-competitive they've looked against teams
Yes.
that are, especially the 49. The game this week was just a demolition, but even the week before, they didn't look really like they were ever in that game against the Cardinals, and who are not that great a team. So, yeah,
Who
writing
who
was
is
on the wall.
who do we think is on the hot seat next?
I think your boy.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a they're starting. Here's why I don't think it'll have. So my boy being um, Washington's head coach. I the the interesting thing about Washington is that they almost have to stick with Rivera, um, it, because it's all about this change the culture shit they're trying to do. And Rivera was a very positive influence, obviously, in the program. There's a lot of calling about, especially after last week's gaffes, which we didn't really have as a storyline, but he kind of did a one word answer of quarterback as what's wrong with the team. And objectively, Carson Wentz hasn't been awful, although he's had some pretty key interceptions. But yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if Rivera gets fired in the offseason. It would surprise me if Rivera is let go before that. It actually might actually, I take that back. It would surprise me if Rivera is let go before the end of next year, just because Washington obviously has, um, let's call it ownership issues. And the longer you can deflect by saying that Ron Rivera um, is changing the culture of the team as opposed to our owner is objectively under investigation by the federal government. Is that is Congress?
yeah,
As long as they can deflect with that and the new name and all the culture, quote unquote, change, I don't know that Rivera gets fired. Mostly because Daniel Snyder, I think, needs a cover. Um,
that's
but I
true.
don't.
If
I
if
I
everybody's
don't
mad at the
inherently disagree with you.
Yeah, if everybody's mad at the head coach, they can't be mad at the owner. And
I
you can't be much more angry at Dan Snyder than everybody already is. So, um, I I'll give you a couple others that
I was gonna say, and I hate to say it, is Dan Campbell on the hot seat?
I think that's starting to heat up. That's one of the ones that I was going to mention. I think that one is definitely going to creep into the public discourse if they can't start to win these games and not just be
Yes.
a fun team. Um, I a few others. I think how long a leash does Mike Tomlin get in Pittsburgh? They're a team that does not like losing seasons. And there were some questions after last year. So we'll see.
They will not. They will not fire him in the regular season,
No, they won't. If they're going to let him go, they'll let him go after the year. But they
and
are not.
it will be a retirement, and there will be a party and a celebration of the Super
Yeah,
Bowl he
no,
won
they'll do
there.
it graciously, but they do care about winning. And if you're not winning, they will figure out a way to get rid of you. Um, so I think that's one. I think the other one in the AFC right now is the Colts with Frank Reich. I think if their
Yeah,
season turns back downhill, I think Frank Reich is going to have some real splaining to do. They're the worst offense scoring wise in the AFC, and one of the worst in football.
Th- There was a name I heard that shocked me when people were
Um,
talking about hot seat.
I've got two, or sorry, the other one I was going to say is Lovey Smith, which I think is going to be really unfair. I think they're going to fire him before they start to turn this thing around.
Yeah.
But I think that's really unfair to Lovey Smith because these guys, the Texans don't quit and they don't not show up. So say what you want about how the roster's constructed and say what you want about how Lovey did in Chicago, but they play hard. So I think it'd be unfair if they got rid of him, but I think that could happen.
I honestly I hope Houston does not do that. Lovie Smith is a very good coach in my opinion. Um,
Yeah,
he with Chicago he did some pretty good things at certain years. Maybe in Tampa Bay didn't do so hot, but Tampa Bay was not a powerhouse by any means back then. If I was given Tom Brady, I'm sure I could be a lot better coach.
yeah.
Um, I you need much like the Washington situation. You almost can't cause headlines. And I think firing Lovie Smith would certainly do that. He's not terrible. You have a shit ton of picks. I think you give him and the general manager opportunities to prove themselves over probably the next 2 to 3 years. And then if the picks that you got from what I've described as the best trade in the National Football League, in the history of the National Football League, I think if those picks don't pan out and you don't see a
I
winning
think
culture,
we'll get there, but I think there's another trade that is looking like it was a bit of a better one.
that's fair. Um, The one I heard the other day, and I don't know if it was just an insane person that I was following on Twitter, or if it's a real human being who watches football, was Cliff Kingsbury.
I was gonna. That was the other name I was gonna say. Is I think Cliff could start to get on the hot seat here.
I
Um,
don't see that uh, after last year.
they
I
gave
don't
him.
know.
Well,
I don't know.
they gave him an extension this offseason, right before they got Kyler's done. I think.
Right, right. So, I mean, the Cardinals haven't looked good this year, right? At least yet. It's still very early in the National Football League for you to be throwing away the F word for coaches that are, if fired, would immediately be hired by somebody else. They got blown out by the Chiefs. They beat the Raiders, who's not a bad team. They got beat by the Rams, who's a good team. They handled the Panthers, and they kept it close with the Eagles. I don't understand the overreaction. Yes, you're what 2-3, but I can't go into that thinking the season is over. Like you didn't. Cliff is a good coach. I just don't like that attitude. And you've ostensibly got through one of the hardest parts of your schedule. In the next 4 games, they play the Seahawks twice, the Saints, and the Vikings. They have the Rams, then the 49ers, then the Chargers, Patriots, Broncos, Bucks, Falcons, and 49ers. They could very well win over 50% of those games and be in contention for the playoff.
Yeah, yeah. I think I was looking at it more if their season goes bad, then does Cliff start to hear the murmurs? And I think
Yeah, but find me 5 losses find me 6 losses. I can't do math in public. Find me 6 losses on that to get them. Aside from really really bad performances or Kyler getting hurt, find me 6 losses on that schedule. Okay, maybe Rams, 49ers twice, Bucks, Vikings. That's 5. Chargers 6. Okay, it could happen. I just put myself in a pretzel there. It could happen, but they would have to perform poorly. I don't think they are going to be significant underdogs against any of those teams.
no, they won't be.
And
Um,
yeah,
yeah, probably not likely, but we'll keep an eye on it. Really funny stat, and then we'll move on to the next
yeah, go
story.
for it.
The Saints have the second worst scoring defense in the NFC, which, as much as we like to say that the Saints have a really good defense, the second worst scoring defense, but they're in second place in their division. They own the tiebreaker over the Falcons that puts them in second at 2-3. Very, very funny stat, despite the fact that they have the second worst scoring defense in the conference. Tied for second with the Commanders, actually. But moving on.
All right, this is gonna hurt to say for some, not me. Russell Wilson is simultaneously not good and also probably losing the popular opinion people had of him less than a year ago.
Um, where do I want to start on Russell Wilson? I mean, Seattle. This is what I was gonna say. Seattle looks like geniuses for that trade.
Mm-hmm.
Kyle Brandt coming out of the woodwork on the NFL Network to say that he Russell Wilson is like an inauthentic person who's not actually a nice guy. The night after he loses that game, um, was very funny.
That's a little mean. That was a little mean. Let's call it what it is. That was a little mean.
I don't necessarily think he's wrong, but I think Florio had a good point this morning where he was like, say that when he's doing well. Like, don't like the day after he has a terrible game is not the time to come out and say that. But also in classically predictable fashion, and a very Steph Curry move, the second that Russ didn't have a good, has really struggled. Now all of a sudden he's hurt, just completely out of nowhere.
Yeah, and so there's two parts to this. One is that we saw that Russell pushed through an injury last year, and he really kind of sucked when he did it. So if that's the case, like he's not a young quarterback. He's
No.
33. It very well may be the time to examine whether or not we put our injured, aging quarterback in if he truly is injured. If it's just a cover for, so he is his regular season stats as of today, having played 5 games in the regular season: 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, average QBR 82.8, and a completion percentage under 60%.
Yeah.
That's bad.
But
That's
like they said, he had a shoulder injury, and did his shoulder injury force him to look completely left and miss a wide open KJ Hamler on a game winning touchdown pass? Some people
that's
are
the other
saying it
thing.
didn't.
Yeah, that was a
Um,
bad look for that team. That
like
was a really bad look. Their reaction, you know, the the way they handled it, the whole thing looked bad.
I I think that they're pretty fed up with him not because they really sold the franchise. They sold everything. They
Yep.
sold a guy that
Future picks.
yeah, future picks. They sold Drew. Like, say what you want about Drew Lock, but there may be some like harbored friendships in that locker room for guys who believed in him. And now you get Russell Wilson in here, and they're like, well, we gave all that up for this guy who also stinks.
Mm-hmm.
So it's yeah, I don't know. I don't know what they do like with Russ, how they get him going, like if they just need to really shorten the field and give him some easier throws to get a little
What
bit.
about comically large chef hat?
Yeah, maybe. Um, he needs to do like that. That it's like that, and then it's all of the social media stuff where he just looks like a serial killer all the time too. Like
not
it's,
not a good time for to release that very odd.
but
And granted, probably not him, probably not written by him. Probably said,
it
"Hey,
had
you're going to do
nothing to
this."
do with him. But it's that with the let's ride thing, and it's just oh
Saying it
god,
after a loss in that a bad loss, like that's your closing remarks with the press corps. Oof, that is something you don't want to do. That's like Kirk Cousins going like, "You like that?" It's like, no, Kirk, you played like shit today.
yeah,
Um,
it's they need to keep him away from the press booth. Like, and that's part. Like, that's why I say Kyle Brandt's not wrong because this all feels like it all feels like he is just a PR machine that does exactly what you would expect the program to do at any given point of if a computer scientist created a franchise quarterback, and that doesn't work when you are leading a room of let's say however many guys they keep on an offensive roster.
yeah,
Let's say a 22 on the two deep. Like it doesn't work when things aren't going well. You can't just like you can't fall back
Yeah,
on
you can't be that guy.
cheesy wall posters and like motivational quotes that go nowhere. Like eventually you have to be a real person, and
Not
it's
done
just
that.
not working right now. So
Yeah, and the body language of some of his teammates,
yeah,
even
like
if you hate the guy,
The
you
Melvin
have to.
Gordon meme and the KJ Hamler thing, like we those are fun to like take out of context and turn into memes, and that's great. But there's something real going on there. Like
Yeah,
it doesn't take a psychologist or a social anthropologist to tell you that there's some sort of functional relationship dynamics that are screwed up in that locker room.
yeah. You don't take off your helmet after losing the game and smash it in the end zone because you were wide open because you're happy with your quarterback.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? And that doesn't happen on a one play thing.
So they go Monday night now. They go to the Chargers, who are banged up, but definitely not out, and they play a much better quarterback. And this could just keep getting uglier for Denver. So I don't know. We'll see, but not great, Bob.
Yeah, well, speaking about another team that's not great, the Packers might not be NFC contenders.
Yeah, I've
I
yeah,
hand up to God, I think we were both wrong on the Packers, right?
I
Like it's starting to look like that.
I kept standing on the hill when we were talking about the Packers versus the Bucks and the Packers versus the Rams, and who did I think was going to figure it out? And I thought it would be the Packers, but there's clearly like you want to talk about guys who are not in sync with their receivers and don't trust them. I think it's the other way around. I think Rodgers is not necessarily playing like bad. I think he just doesn't have any trust in any of these guys are going to get open. That when they do get open, he's like they're going to catch the football. Um, and that it's not going away soon. They need a bye week. They need a ayahuasca trip. They need something to get themselves on the same page. And I don't know that.
Well, they have the Jets this week and the Commanders next week, so they might be in two very get right games back to back.
I have a pick for that game that I think will surprise you, but
Okay,
um,
I'm excited.
uh, I. I don't think this might not even be an in season fix. Like even a bye week fix. Like the way they just you can tell that he's only got two options whenever he drops back, and it's Lazard and Cobb. And if it's not going to one of those two guys, it's not going. So um, that's part of the I think it's a huge problem for them right now. Yeah, I don't know if you take them out of play. I think there's a pretty good chance that we see a brand new reshuffling at the top of the NFC with the way that both the Eagles and Cowboys are playing in the East. The Vikings are winning games. Let's put it that way. I don't know that they're actually good, but they're winning games.
They are winning games technically.
Yeah, and the way that San Francisco might find its groove here with Jimmy G at quarterback, you could see a top of the NFC that looks nothing like we really thought.
I think it'll be interesting. I think there's a lot of. I mean, very early in the season. It's this is where like this is the prime time in the year where you're like college football halfway through the regular season, if not further. So there's a lot at stake in some of these games, and this is NFL Week 6. We have a lot of games to play left.
Yeah.
So I am excited. I think it's a little early to judge. I do think the Packers, there's just something is not clicking in that receiving core, and Rodgers doesn't look great. Obviously, you go to England and play against a good, but I still think fraudulent Giants team. We'll speak on that maybe at another time. But you
Oh,
think
no,
this
I'm
is
going to
like a
speak on it this week because I'm starting to catch the crap from Giants fans, and I'm ready to fight back.
okay? I have a pick that will please you in that regard. So I think, yeah. Look, I just think that they should be a good team. It's not Rodgers, so what is happening on offense that is not clicking? So I think it'll be interesting to see how they kind of go in for the next 3 weeks. Like I said, um, they do have an easy schedule in the next 2 weeks. I don't think the Jets or Commanders are playoff contention teams. But then you got the Bills right after that, and that's not an easy game.
No.
And then maybe you have the Lions. You count that on early November as a win. But then you're at the Cowboys when Dak will certainly be back. Um, and then 2 weeks later, you're playing the Eagles. So, like, the Packers very well could be about a 500 team as they kind of continue throughout the season. And I think that would kind of shock me a little bit, which means the Vikings would come out on top. Um, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see as far as teams that disappointed in the stand, like how you thought teams would perform this early. These first 5 games, the Packers have not looked good, not looked good at all. Um, all right, so we had this as a topic. I think you and I are going to differ on this significantly, but I want to hear your take. So obviously, two very controversial roughing the passer calls, both in which and one non-call, and all three kind of had the same. Either a quarterback was going to the ground and had a defender who was actively tackling them throw their body weight on them, and that's kind of how all three went, or they were thrown to the ground. The NFL has defended the officials, and the officials have gone on record with reporters and said, "Here's what I saw. This is why I made the call." But I'm interested to hear your take, Mike.
Um, I I don't the Chris Jones one. I don't know that I fault the official as much for, just because he couldn't see where the ball was. So by the letter of the rule, I think the rule is dumb. The landing on the quarterback rule is not great. I think there's probably a different way to write that rule to have it, or to add some sort of intent that makes it a little bit easier and like honest to the game. Because I think the mere so if Chris Jones doesn't end up with the ball there, isn't necessarily roughing the passer just because he lands on him. Yes, by the rule, but is that right? I don't think so, because there's not really anywhere else for Chris Jones to go with his body weight. And at some point, these are football players who are on the same field as much larger football players, and that's the risk you run. Their advantage is that they're faster than the much
Mm-hmm.
larger people. So
Yeah,
um,
typically,
yeah,
some not so
usually,
much.
yeah, unless their name is like Aaron Donald or Michael Parsons. But uh, the the Grady Jarrett one was just seemed like that's Tom Brady and he fell too hard. And that to me is the one that, because the Falcons were out of that game dead, and then they made a furious comeback, and that was a third down and long that should have turned the ball over, and to really take the game out of the Falcons' hands in that spot on a play that's a football play. And Tua scrambled the eggs in his brain off the turf in Cincinnati on a very similar tackle. And that wasn't called roughing the passer, but this play was. So I don't know how you square those two as the NFL and say that the official got it right in both circumstances. That doesn't make any sense to me. Um, so I think that this is gonna have to be looked at in the offseason, and how they do this and how they look at it. Maybe there's some sort of modified reviewable rule where these are reviewable in situations where there otherwise would be a fourth down situation, or there otherwise would be a scoring there's got to be. The Kansas City one ended up being less consequential, partially because they had a host of makeup calls in the second half of that game. Um, but there's got to be some sort of standard of review, or like Sky Judge or somebody has to have some sort of like interjection in this process to say, hey, you guys clearly got that one wrong, and if we let that stand, it's going to create havoc. And I wrote an article about this about 4 or 5 months ago, that I think as legalized gambling makes its way across the country, this is not going away. It's going to get worse. For the NFL as far as an issue, because it's one thing when it's just a bunch of shadows on Twitter with 3 followers yelling at the official Twitter account, and they can just mute everybody. But when the sports books are actively upset because they can't predictably set lines because they're getting hosed by bad calls that affect the outcomes of these games. I think that's where the NFL is going to have a big issue, and that's going to create allegations of game fixing, and the things that people are necessarily afraid of with legalized gambling that will shift the trend back in the other direction. And once the NFL turns that money faucet on, as far as legalized gambling goes, they're not going to want to turn it off. So they're going to find a system. I don't care how they do it. They will find a system that makes this work out correctly in almost all cases. So just get ahead of it now. Either implement a sky judge, make these calls reviewable. Like, I don't know what you need to do, but
I disagree with that portion. I think you need to change the rule regarding the kind of ambiguity related to the roughing the passer call. The the rules states that the defender must strive to fall on the side of the quarterback's body or to brace his fall with his arms to avoid landing on the quarterback with all or most of his body weight. So technically, landing on the quarterback with your full body weight is designed to protect the quarterback from being punished as you're hitting him to the ground, almost as if like it's unnecessary roughness. Here's my hot take: the Tua tackle, the one that got him in the position where he was concussed, probably was a roughing the passer, which is why you saw that called against Brady. So for those of you who don't know, they don't really publish them, but there are league internal like weekly meetings and memos that they push out basically saying like this is what we're going to start more handedly enforcing for the season. And then as the season goes on and the NFL starts to see trends in the officiating crews, they will push out like, hey, this should have been called as rough. The official in that Miami game probably got like not a scolding because they're very good at their job still, but a talking to and a league wide memo blasted out saying like this should have been roughing the passer because of the way Tua was thrown to the ground. So that's why I think Brady was covered, and people are going to be like, it's Brady, 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 but whatever. As far as the Chiefs one, that's a little weaker, but that's the way the NFL's been calling it. And I know people don't like it because, of course, if that's just a sack, maybe it's a little different, but a sack fumble recovered by Kansas City that then is overturned, where, I'm pretty sure the Raiders went on to score that drive as well
yeah,
late in the quarter or late in the
yeah,
half.
yeah.
So that's tough, right? That's a lot of more controversy. And is, like, let's look at it, honestly, like it didn't matter in the end. Granted, that's not the
I mean,
guaranteed outcome.
You could say it affected the spread. If Kansas City gets the ball, they likely score, and then they probably win by a touchdown.
Fair. However, by the letter of the law, the way the rule is written, and half of these officials are lawyers anyway, um, that is a penalty. Now, it's fair to say the NFL should review that because a 330-pound linebacker or defensive end coming full speed at, running at a 5-second 40 at worst and then hitting a guy, it's hard to fall to his side. Like, it's just a very natural thing that happens as you fall on the quarterback. So I'm okay with the league taking a look at it to reevaluate the necessity, but I think, first of all, I don't think replay for an objective call is good. And I think you're going to see what happened last 2 years ago when pass interference was reviewable and like almost not a single one of them was overturned, or I don't think a single one actually was overturned. So I don't like the objective calls being reviewable by any means. It wouldn't shock me if they had something implemented where replay can come back and say you might want to retake a look at it. It may be roughing if they loosen the rules and don't make it as significant, but I don't think you're going to see replay come in over the top of a especially referee because that's his assignment. His guy to watch is the quarterback. I don't think you're going to see the NFL go to a replay situation where that is a reviewed penalty play. It's weird that it happened twice in 1 week. That's going to be the talking point, but the league does adjust midseason through internal memos to like tell the officials what they want in the future. Maybe they're more lenient on this, just like we saw a couple of years ago when offensive pass interference was getting called a lot for blocks downfield on a screen pass, and that became a big thing for a couple of days or weeks, and then it kind of toned down after that. So we'll see. I don't know if you had anything more on the rough and the passer.
No, I think that they also, I think that streamlining replay and not necessarily publicizing the review, you could, I understand you make a good point on trying not to create second guessing of every single. You definitely don't make it challengeable, um, but it would be a triggered review for, and I say Sky Judge for those of you who are not PFT wonks like I am. Florio's ideas that there is another member of the officiating crew added in the press box to trigger rapid reviews of calls that are either egregious or seem like they're very
Missed.
incorrect, and all of that review. It's similar to like the NBA. I think has theirs in like Secaucus, and the NHL has one in Toronto where it's reviewed internally to the officials, and the call is made from the league office, basically, absent any of the officials on the field. There's a way to streamline that where it's done a lot faster than the way that those leagues do it. But I think that that's an option here, and especially in a situation where um, that that penalty, one way or the other, could drastically affect something like a win or loss or a spread result.
Right. No, you're right. You're not wrong. I think it'll be interesting to see how the NFL adjusts. To be honest, I think that's the biggest takeaway is that they will adjust based on fan criticism and internal evaluation. And I think you'll see a rule change in the offseason, maybe. I think you'll definitely see at least some league internal memos that don't get published kind of change the nature of that. And I think maybe my point was with the Tua thing, I think that was maybe the overcorrection to the TBI basically that we saw on national television and what should have been called, and then a reversal of like, hey, we're going to go out of our way to protect the quarterbacks getting hit in concussion scenarios for like the next couple weeks, and then these calls will make them tone it down on what they're calling because they
Yeah,
do very much try and describe to the referees the exact kind of game that they want, and then it's the referee's job to officiate within the rules from there.
yeah. I think I would say if you're gonna do that, you got to do that early in games, and you have to do it league
Mm-hmm.
wide. I think wait, like if that was the reaction, waiting till that spot to make that call is, and granted, you can't just manufacture a roughing the passer call to get it to work. But I think it's a little bit to go the other way and lack any sort of sense of how drastically that affected the outcome of the Atlanta game, is a little bit short sighted by that official. And Boger's a good, but he's been around forever. But
Mm-hmm.
I think if that's the motivation, I think you got to find a different spot to make that call.
Yeah, I. It'll be interesting to see how they adapt. You wanted to talk. This is our last subject before we talk about picks and games this week. You wanted to talk about fan analytics, Michael.
No, I'm not a fan of analytics.
Oh, you wanted to talk about how you're not a fan of fan analytics. That's fine.
Yeah. Well, really quick because we gotta get going here, but McDaniel's going for two. Didn't make any sense to me on Monday night. I You say he's going for the win after they score um, to tie the game. That it's 31-31. No, sorry, it was 31-30. They could have kicked to tie it. Instead, he goes for two. They don't get
Don't
it.
get it. Yeah.
They get the stop, and Kansas City punts, but they can't get the ball up to kick a field goal to win the game, and they lose. Um, I don't necessarily disagree, or sorry, I still don't understand what you gain from going for two, because if the Chiefs wanted to, they absolutely would have gotten into field goal range and kicked that. And regardless, that's revisionist history. At the time, there's no way, as the coach of the Raiders, you can assume that Mahomes was not going to come down and kick the field goal anyway.
Right.
So by going for two, you gain nothing. If you don't get it, you now all they have to do is kneel the clock out and run the clock down, and then they were one first down away from ending that game. One. They didn't get it because they threw a 15-yard pass on 3rd and 1, which didn't make any sense to me
No,
whatsoever.
that was wild too. That was
Yeah,
wild too.
but they were that close to ending the game, and then you look like a moron.
Hmm.
So I don't know what McDaniels thought was there, but if you tie the game on an extra point and Mahomes goes down and scores and kicks a field goal, you're in the same spot that you would be if he kicked the field goal anyway. And because you still need a field goal to win you still need a
Right.
field goal
You
to at
still
least tie
need
the game. But
right.
if you miss or if you miss that 2-point conversion, now if Mahomes comes down and kicks a field goal, you need a touchdown. This game's over. So the most likely result out of the next Mahomes drive was that they were going to score somehow, and you would need a touchdown to win the game, which you were never going to have time to get. So it never made sense to me of why you go there. I didn't get it. Didn't make any sense. The Staley 4th down one was even more obvious, but that's his MO. So yeah,
Yeah, that was wild. That
yeah,
was wild. I don't
the
know. So.
that one I just chalk up to Staley being nuts, but the McDaniels one going for 2 there to try to get a 1-point lead to somehow put pressure on Patrick Mahomes, who went and kicked a field goal with 13 seconds left
Yeah.
against the Bills in the playoffs in Week 5. You think that putting him down 1 with 4 minutes left is putting any sort of pressure on Patrick Mahomes is asinine.
Yeah.
And I'll leave it at that. Let's get into the game.
Agreed. Okay, games. Thursday night football. The barn burner everybody's been waiting for. Bears at Commanders. Or Commanders at Bears. Um, both these teams are really bad.
Yeah, I might watch an Etch a Sketch instead of this game.
Okay, here's what I'm going to say. I have 2 picks. I think they're both going to hit. I'm fairly confident both are going to hit. The first pick is under 38. The Bears don't pass.
That is true.
I don't know why. So 38 points doesn't confuse me. The other, and people aren't going to like this because they do suck, but the Commanders still have a top 4 or 5 defensive line in the league. That's with Chase Young out. He is not slated to come back. They're not rushing him back. I don't think there's any pressure to, given the start of their season. And I don't know how the Bears are going to move the ball against the Commanders' D line. So that's why I like the under, and primetime unders have been great already. I don't inherently know that the Bears are going to be able to throw in the weather that they have. That's going to be 15-mile-an-hour winds. But Carson Wentz does have a pretty good arm. Despite his mistakes and his touchdown interception ratio, he does have a good arm. He has, guess who's the top number 5 in passing yards in the league? It's Carson Wentz, which is shocking, but still somehow the truth.
Doesn't he also have 10 touchdowns?
Yes, he is not. He is getting a lot of shit for being who he is, but he is actually not playing terribly. So I think the Commanders is the pick here with the under. I would be surprised if Chicago wins, truly. And I've watched a lot of Commanders football, and I know when there's like red flags. But this is not one of them. It would shock me if the Bears come out on top here. And then the under is a combination of I don't know how the Bears are going to score that much, and I don't also know like the trend just in primetime is to take the under. So that's my pick.
Yep. I have nothing. We can move to Sunday.
Okay. So 1 p.m. slate goes as follows. Jags at Colts. Jags are +2. Jets at Packers. Packers are anywhere between like -8 and -7. Depends on your book. Ravens are -5.5 at Giants. Bengals are -1 or 1.5, depending on your book, at Saints. Bucks are -8 against Steelers at Steelers. 49ers -5.5 at Falcons. Patriots +2.5. I've seen the line has moved at the Browns. And Vikings -3 against a Tua-less Dolphins. He will still be out this week. That's your 1 p.m. slate. Mike, run down for me what you got.
So last week I went 4-3, 16-12 on the season at 57%. So almost the opposite side of the coin of college football. Got hosed on Seattle not closing that game out. Would have had a really good week otherwise. So for this week, I have 5 plays in the 1 o'clock window out of the 6 I have total. Cincinnati -1.5. This is me continuing to fade the Saints. They're not good. They put up a lot of points last week against Seattle, who has the worst, I think, scoring defense in the NFL. The Bengals have a much better defense. They have a arguably better offense too, despite the fact they haven't played that way. So I think it's kind of a public pick, but I like Cincinnati going to New Orleans. I think that they'll game plan up to get around New Orleans defensive line. They've got too many weapons on the outside for New Orleans secondary, and the bottom line is New Orleans is not going to score nearly as many points as they did last week. I like Cincinnati there. Jacksonville +2 at Indianapolis. They've had their number recently. They won, or what was that, week 2 they played and beat
Yes.
the Colts. I get that they're going on the road, and Indianapolis just beat the Broncos, but Indy, like we said, has the worst scoring offense in the AFC. Jacksonville hasn't looked good the past 2 weeks. They just scored only 6 points against the Texans. This is their get right spot. I like Jacksonville +2 here. I think if you would have said this line was going to be +2 a week ago, everybody would have laughed at you. This is a pick I alluded to earlier. The Jets +7.5. The Jets defense is playing really well, and they have 2 good corners now. Sauce Gardner has been fantastic. Got his first pick last week, but he has 6 passes defense and 20 tackles. And he and DJ Reed go up against the not very intimidating duo of Randall Cobb and Alan Lazard. I think that there's a good argument to play the under here, but I do think the Jets go in and keep this close. I don't think they win. I think the Packers win, but I don't think this is going to be a blowout in the way that most people think it is. So I like the Jets to keep it within a score. Other side of my stance, I'm taking Baltimore -6. This is the first good team the Giants have played, and it's going to show on Sunday. The Giants, the Packers have played mediocre. The only other ish team that they've played is the Titans. They being the Giants. Every other team that they've played has been either a clunker or the Cowboys, a game they lost. So I think I've said this all along. I think Dable's a good coach. I think they're extremely well coached, but I don't think they're a good football team. And I think it shows on Sunday. I think Baltimore wins comfortably. They may win by a touchdown, but I think they win comfortably. And then my last one is 49ers Falcons under 44.5. I don't know why this total is so high when San Francisco's defense has been playing lights out. And Atlanta's offense is now missing Cordero Patterson, and Kyle Pitts is banged up. I get the games in Atlanta, but it doesn't matter to me. I like the under 44.5 there.
Yeah, so I have 3 picks for the 1 p.m. slate. We have basically similar picks too. So I have Bengals -1.5. Saints offense is just very sad. Bengals will play well. I think they're in kind of not a must win, but a should win, and I think that plays into it. I've been high on the Bengals for a while. I think they're going to come out here and show out the Saints, who I just think have been playing like shit. I also have Baltimore -6. I think the train is coming to a stop for New York. They've gone on a hot streak. I think it's time to cool off. Ravens are playing well. Ravens also in a tough division and kind of a need to win scenario. Every game matters in the NFL kind of mentality, but also the Ravens, this is one of those games where you can set yourself up for success like this week after beating the Bengals in primetime. Whereas, I don't know, the Giants, they just don't do it for me. I think they're frauds. I think they get exposed here. I think the Ravens are a much better team. And I know we've been saying that about every Giants game, but whatever. And then finally, this is going to be a weird one. New York Jets team total over 17.5. The only reason I have this pick, and we'll see, is that opponents' team total overs are like 6-1 this year, or 6-1 in the past 3 years when the other team is coming back from London. And the Packers look like shit. I don't know that their defense is there. Obviously the Giants not just coming off a win, but putting up more than that. And I don't know that I see the Giants as a worse team than the Jets right now. I think they're both about evenly matched. Like if you were to do what's the spread, I think
Definitely
it,
inside a field goal. Probably Giants minus 2.5.
yeah. So I see a world in which the Packers don't have a shootout. The Packers defense plays average, and the Jets are able to score. All you need is 3 touchdowns.
Yeah.
So I like that team total over.
Don't forget that is the LaFleur Sala wedding bowl. Um, the Matt LaFleur, head coach of the Packers, Mike LaFleur, his brother, offensive coordinator for the Jets, and Rob Sala, I'm pretty sure was in Matt LaFleur's wedding.
I believe
Um,
that's correct.
yeah, so a lot of familiarity there. Tends to lean itself towards the over.
Yes, and keeping it within the number,
Yes.
at least over a field goal. Okay, moving on. So our 4 p.m. slate, not bad matchups. 2 3:05 games. Oh, there's an asterisk for one of these. We'll get to that in a second. Three 4 p.m. games. Panthers at Rams. Panthers are +11. Woof. Cardinals -2.5 at Seahawks. Bills -2.5 at Chiefs. I think the asterisk is the asterisk being I think one of these turns later if there's something to do with MLB. I believe it's the Panthers Rams. Is that correct?
No, it's the Seahawks and the Cardinals because if the Mariners make it to Game 4, that game will be played in Seattle before the Seattle Arizona game.
Okay. Yeah. So Seahawks will kick off like an hour and a half later if that's the case, which is a weird thing that the NFL did to reschedule around it. But I get it.
Yeah.
Totally cool. Um,
I think it's probably, I don't think it's like they're being nice. I think those two stadiums are right next to each other. I think
ah,
it's probably like we can't fit everybody in the parking lots sort of.
okay. That would make sense.
Or like a staffing for, they may be owned by the same company, so they may not be able to staff. Or it may be like a public safety, they can't get enough police officers or
Or
whatever.
let a doubleheader occur. I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah.
uh,
Or just like, just be cool, but whatever.
I have 2 picks. One is just out of respect, but the first is Cardinals -2.5. Cliff needs to get it together. Kyler needs to get it together. I think this happens against the Seahawks, who have been riding high on being able to score. I think the Cardinals are able to handedly beat the Seahawks by more than a field goal, and even if it's just by a field goal, you're within the number. So I'm taking Cardinals -2.5, and then out of the utmost respect for the both of these teams, Bills Chiefs over 54. Um, I know it's a high number. I don't care. I hope to see a lot of points. This is like one of those that I'm not even confident in. I'm just going to bet
Yeah.
this
You just,
because
you're betting with your heart.
yes, 100%, 100%. Those are my 2 picks for this time
Yeah.
slate.
I'm trying to bet with my head in Virginia and not North Carolina. Um, I have one play in this window. It is Seattle and the Cardinals over 50.5. Both of these teams have good offenses, don't have good defenses. 50 feels too low. You need both of them to get to 25. Feels very doable. Seattle just did it with the Saints last week, and the Cardinals will score if they need to score. So add those two up. Feels like an over game. I'm just going to sit back and watch the Bills Chiefs. I hope that's a good game.
Last 2 games, Sunday Night Football. Cowboys at Eagles. Cowboys are +6. Over under 42. Excuse me. And then Broncos at Chargers. Chargers are -4.5. Over under is 45.5. Would you like to go first or second, Michael?
I will go first. I have one play. It's a may add. May add the under 45.5 on the Monday night game. Don't know why this is so high. Denver hasn't gotten anything together. The Chargers are super banged up. Tells me
Hmm.
neither of these teams are going to score a particularly large amount of points. Don't know why it's at 45.5.
I don't hate it. I have 3 picks. Chargers minus 4.5. Um, Broncos are bad. I don't know how to say that. Russell Wilson has not looked like himself. They can't get passes together. His QBR sucks. Chargers um, need a win to stay in contention more so than the Broncos by far margins. I think the Broncos get dominated by the Chargers. I think this is one of those Monday night stinkers. I'm also taking the under in that game, 45.5. I don't see the Broncos scoring. That's why I picked the Chargers. I think it's going to be an under. I'm going to thread the needle. Chargers minus 4.5 and the under 45.5. And then Cowboys at Eagles. I was really torn on the spread. Eventually, I'm settling on under 42. Both of these teams have good defenses. And I don't inherently know that the Eagles have played a single team with a good defense yet. So if the Cowboys have a good defense, but they can't really score that many points because of the quarterback situation, I think they've scored an average of like 21, 22.
Yeah.
And the
And some of
Eagles,
those have been defense and special teams. I think they only scored 9 actual points
yes.
against the Rams.
And the Eagles haven't scored more than 29 points since the first game in Detroit, which if you look at how much they scored 38 in Detroit, but then 24 at Washington and in Minnesota, which, they didn't look great. And then scored 29 at Jacksonville and 20 in Arizona. I I think the Eagles haven't played great defenses except for Washington and Minnesota, and I think they fluked in Arizona. So I think they're not. I think they struggle against good defenses, and I think the Cowboys have a very good defense and have been winning games because they have a good defense. They have held all of their opponents under 20 points. So if you look at 42.5 in prime time on a Sunday night at Eagles, this doesn't seem like an over. This seems like an under. I think Micah Parsons is going to eat. So we'll see, but that's my pick for that
Vegas
game.
agrees with you. 92% of the cash on the under, while 63% of the tickets are on the over.
That's why I'm a sharp. Just kidding. I'm not. All right, Mike. Oh, I got one more ad. So I'm going to do a parlay. It's plus 475. Money line on Bengals, Commanders, and Cardinals. Both light favorites. I like all three. Usually I do like a underdog money line parlay, but I like all three of these teams in these situations. I think they all come out on top. And you can combine all three money lines to get a nice little payout. So that's my pick. Mike, you got anything to add?
Nope. Have a good
All
week.
right. Have a good week, everybody.